Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. We are very pleased today to host the first of our monthly webinars, which is sponsored by the Trade and Investments Committee. My name is Paul Miles. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm delighted that you're able to join us today on a series of, the first of a series of topics that will help our members understand more and get further insights into the tremendous opportunities that exist in Brazil. Today, we're going to talk about those sectors in Brazil that we call the resilient sectors, the ones that prosper when the economy slips. And before I tell you about our speaker and how we're going to conduct this webinar this afternoon, I'd like to invite everybody who's listening in to join us for our second webinar, which we are going to host next month on the 27th of March. And the topic for that webinar will be how to help companies to competitively participate in procurement opportunities in Brazil provided by government agencies and major competitors. And that will be hosted by the Mandala Group by Paulo Saad. So, firstly, why is today's topic of such relevance? And we've received many inquiries from our members who are concerned, have expressed interest in better understanding how the deacceleration of the economy, particularly in emerging markets, and Brazil is probably the lead example of this, as well as the upcoming elections in October in Brazil, could impact the sectors that they operate in, and whether this will have a long-term effect on their businesses. So before we go straight into our topic for this afternoon, I would just like to explain that the webinars are really, they're free to everyone, and you're welcome to listen in, and they will be posted afterwards for our members on the BCC's website. So if you haven't yet become a member, I encourage you to sign up and join the chamber. The webinars will normally take about 30 minutes, and you can participate by posting your questions in the chat area. And as the facilitator for this afternoon's event, I will make sure that our speaker will receive these questions and will answer them. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Luiz Zorzella from Amquant. He is the founder and principal of this company, and he is an expert on the topic of growth and strategy, and a leader also here in the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. In fact, Luiz is the vice chair of the Trade and Investments Committee. So without further delay, I welcome Luiz and ask him please to take us through his presentation.
Thank you, Paul. So, as Paul mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the resilient sector. So understanding in Brazil which sectors prosper when the economy slips. Like some of them actually prosper even more when in the years that the Brazilian economy faces challenges. From today's conversation, and I'm already giving the final answer here, what you need to remember is that first, despite its current stability, the Brazilian economy still has its ups and downs. Down years actually represent 1 out of every 4 or 5 years in Brazil, or I should say 1 out of every president in Brazil. And historically in this year, in this recent history, the main beneficiary of during these the main winners during these down years have been export-related sectors. In particular, in non-consumer oriented sectors such as mining and equipment, those have been sectors that actually in years of difficulty, they have prospered even more than their historical average growth rate. But You will also find that other sectors, especially import-related sectors and services, have also proven very resilient to downturns. So what I mean by resilient, it means that even though they take a hit and they have historically performed a little bit below their historical average growth rate, they still have historically grown positively, even on years that where we have been facing challenges. So let's go to the first one. That despite the instability, Brazilian economy still has its ups and downs, right? And if you look at this chart here, which is kind of very complicated, right? We basically outlined for the period of 1984, which was when Brazil had its political regime change, to 2012, which is the last year that we have full year numbers. Uh, how has been the GDP performance of Brazil? And you will see that even though Brazil has enjoyed an average growth in this long period of 3.1%, you would still see here on the left that about 1 out of 4 years, about 25% of the total number of years in this sample here, actually the growth of the economy was less than 1%. And then you can say, okay, yeah, but this includes the 80s, which was a very challenging time for Brazil. So what if we take only a more recent history into consideration? And you see that the picture doesn't change that much. If you start the sampling from 1994 and totally skip the 80, which was a terrible time for Brazil, you would still see exactly a very similar picture. Like the average growth rate is still 3.2%, and 1 out of 5 years it still has a growth rate less than 1%. You will find that some of the extremes are less pronounced in this period, but still you will find the same average growth rate and still find the same frequency of downturns. All right, I'll move to the next one then. So, as most people are probably aware, emerging markets have taken a slowdown this year. And the expected growth rates of emerging markets in general and Brazil has been, the forecasts have been decreased by at least 0.2, 0.3% on average by the economists. So it is very important to understand if this happens, and especially in the scenario of an election, what are the sectors that have been more resistant to this? And what we did here is that we took these worst 25% of the years in this sample, and we saw which were the sectors that did well in those years. And you see that we actually not only did this exercise for poor years in terms of GDP growth, but also for other variables like high unemployment, high inflation, or the election years. And what we observe here, if you look at the blue dots here on this screen, is that the export, import, and service related sectors have fared very well. This, or in some cases, even better than historical average in years where the GDP has been 1% or less, that unemployment rate was over 8.5%, where inflation rate was in the top quartile, and on the election years. You will see that agriculture, other primary and industry have not fared bad in years where Brazil was plagued by high unemployment, high inflation, or even election years. They actually have done quite well. The only thing is that if you look at them in terms of how they are impacted by low GDP growth, uh, those were the sectors where you actually see a negative growth in the worst 25% of the years in Brazil. Well, in these sectors, if you look at, so then services, imports, and exports oriented sectors, what type of sectors are we talking about? We're talking about information technology, we're talking about financial services, we're talking about imports related to machinery, auto parts, exports related to mining and ores especially, and equipment in general. So I'll stop here in case there are any questions. Paul, are there any questions?
Well, we do. I think perhaps you can address this question that's come in, perhaps at the end, which is, from your experience, whether the results of the elections will change the fundamental course of Brazil to date. I mean, it's very difficult to forecast things like that, but that's probably one of the big questions that our members have in the back of their minds, particularly in the sectors that you've just spoken about. Will it change things?
Well, that's a very good question. And this study here was actually more focused on which sectors, in the case, for example, of elections, which sectors underperformed because of the inherent uncertainty that's associated with the election process. So not with whether the government that is elected is pro or against business, or
Yep.
if or any of those other issues. What I can say is that the first year of most of presidencies presidency terms in Brazil have been reasonably positive for all the sectors in general. Uh, but what you see is a more diverse type of reaction is again on the anticipation for the elections and all the uncertainty that precedes those.
Right. That's a great point, Luis. So what would you suggest to our members and companies thinking about expanding or reviewing their presence in Brazil right now? What would you say to them based on what you've just pointed out in the growth sectors? What advice would you have for them?
For companies that are considering doing business in Brazil, the first very obvious implication is if you try to time your ideal investment. So, or time to understand what are the triggers to your investment. If you say, oh, I'm going to wait until the election to do this, or I'm going to, like, should I do this year or next year, right? But I think that equally important is for you to consider what is the strategy that you will use to go to that market. You will see that some of the sectors, which include some of your potential clients, some of your potential suppliers, and some of your potential partners, might be experiencing this moment in the Brazilian economy in a different way. For companies that are currently already with operations in Brazil, then again, it's a perfect opportunity to review the company's strategy for the country and to even consider capturing opportunistic deals in the same or adjacent markets. So maybe if you see that this is a phase that will go and you're committed to the region, maybe that's a very attractive time for you to buy a small player in Brazil and at a very convenient, attractive price. And for Brazilian companies, I think that the most obvious implication for this is for them to redefine what are the most attractive opportunities that they see in the time frame of 2014, 2015. I think, as again, we see that the different sectors react very differently to these factors that are playing in the economy. If you already have what are your priorities for this period, I think maybe it's a good time for you to reassess those. So I would like to thank Paul and thank you all for taking this time. I was respective of the total time of the webinar. If you have any further questions, please send me an email at info@amquant.com. That's AMQUANT.com. And I'll return to Paul.
Thank you, Luiz. That was very, very useful. And again, to our members, if you are thinking of how to approach Brazil, you can contact the Chamber, who can potentially help you, or even Luiz himself at Amquant. He would be, I'm sure, delighted to be able to assist you in your business opportunities. And from my side, I would just like also to thank everybody and to remind you of two things. One is, if you are not yet a member of the Chamber, please go on the website and sign up. You'll find that your membership will be extremely valuable as you approach Brazil. And secondly, that we will be hosting our second webinar, as I said at the beginning, on the 27th of March. And the topic again for that will be how to help companies competitively participate in the procurement opportunities in Brazil provided by government agencies and major corporations. And that's it. So thank you very much to everybody, and good afternoon.